for Communications and Policy. Okay. As Superintendent Ibarra just said, we are capturing this webinar that will be posted on the department's post-legislative website, along with other video presentations from directors, since we couldn't see you all in person this spring. You can submit questions during the webinar. We will answer them at the end after the presentations, and we'll get to as many as we can in the time that we've got. If your question does not get answered during the webinar, we will be posting Q&A on that post-legislative website. I'm going to be very brief because I know that you're all anxious to hear from Chris Campbell and Tim Hill and his staff. But I do want to touch on just a couple of policy issues from this session that were of particular interest and will be moving forward. So the session was really marked by several weeks of hearings and discussion about administrative rules. And I think that those were thoroughly discussed. Lots of issues were brought up. I can tell you that for the most part, the education rules were reauthorized. The content standards in math, ELA, and science were left intact for now. However, there was clear direction from both House and Senate that changes to the content standards, as well as changes to teacher certification standards and assessments were expected, and that they wanted us to do research and have conversations about those. And I'm going to touch on that in a little bit more detail in a minute. By the end of the session, they passed 34 education-related policy bills. Probably of most interest, as the superintendent mentioned, were the governor's career ladder bill to add the advanced professional endorsement, House Bill 523, and House Bill 624 that sunsets the master educator premium. I am not going to cover those two pieces because Chris and Tim will do that. And of course, as you all know, the coronavirus pandemic marked the final days of the session. Their target for adjournment was March 20th, and they actually adjourned on March 20th. That's rare. They did not, however, stay the 5 days required by law to address any vetoes. So I'm going to touch on actually a couple of Senate concurrent resolutions, and these are of interest moving forward. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the department is doing in response to these resolutions and the direction from the legislature. So Senate Concurrent Resolution 120 asks that the Board of Education and the department work together to research options that would basically stop administering the ISAT in grade 10 and replace it with another assessment such as the SAT. That is a discussion that has been going on for a few years. And many of you have weighed in and have been part of those discussions. And this resolution directs us to do some research and come forward next session with that research and potentially with some ideas and proposals for the legislature to consider. And Senate Concurrent Resolution 132 would establish a legislative interim committee to recommend new standards for our schools. They would consider and recommend a process for adopting new content standards, taking into account the time that's required to do that, as well as the preparation of teachers, curriculum to go along with any new content standards. Several legislators made it very clear to the superintendent and to the Board of Education that they were not actually going to write new standards. They are wanting to provide direction on the process, and they want to look at other states' content standards. They want to discuss how Idaho standards could be improved. The Legislative Council is the body of the legislature that decides what interim committees will be convened. They typically meet at the end of the session. They did not do that given the COVID-19 situation. They are meeting on June 5th to decide on interim committees. So stay tuned. We'll let you know once we know whether or not that committee will be moving forward. But the superintendent and the department do intend to get started on a process to review the content standards in math, ELA, and science, as well as teacher certification standards. And the superintendent and the board will be having discussions around the high school assessment. I do want to let you know that the superintendent and President Critchfield received a letter from the House and Senate Education Committees that laid out issues that they wanted to make sure the department and the board addressed. And so we do have some initial direction from them. And so we are going to get started with the process. And I want you to know that we will be reaching out to those of you out there in the district to help us with those processes. We are going to need the experts to come together and start those reviews. So you'll be hearing more from us about that. So I also want to let you know that there is a summary of all of the education-related bills and links to those bills on the SDE's post-legislative webpage, and I provided a link here, but you can find it if you go to the superintendent's page on sde.idaho.gov. I am going to touch on just two bills very, very quickly and let you know that there were a lot of controversial bills that did not pass this session. There were a few that did, but we were very glad that the driver training reimbursement bill passed, and I want to just take an opportunity to thank the Idaho School Boards Association for spearheading those efforts to get that reimbursement increased from $125 to $150 per student, and that goes into effect on July 1. So we were very pleased about that. I do also just want to touch on appropriations bills and let you know that there are links to all of the K through 12 appropriation bills on this website. I think it's really important to look at those from a couple of perspectives. One thing that a lot of folks don't always follow is the intent language that is in the appropriations bill, the appropriations bills. That intent language has the same force and effect of law, although it lasts for just the next fiscal year. But often the legislature does signal their intent and specifics with respect to distributions. So take a look at those. Some of that will change given what Tim and his shop are going to talk about. The other thing that I think is important to look at on all of these bills is the voting record. When you click on the link to any bill, the first page that you will see includes how individual legislators voted on that piece of legislation. And I think it's instructive to know how your legislators in your districts voted on specific bills. So I'm going to take just a minute to talk about what's ahead for next year. I think we all know that the budget and the economy is going to be at the forefront of discussions in the session, and that all has an impact on all of us. We'll also be talking about recovery from the pandemic and how we make sure we're better prepared moving forward in the event we face this situation again. The superintendent's going to be interested in talking to legislators about any changes that need to be made to address obstacles and issues that were really brought to light during the pandemic, and make sure that those are being addressed. And there will be continued discussion of content standards and teacher certification standards, as well as the assessments. And the superintendent will be providing the legislature with an update on what we have done so far on those fronts. I do want to mention that Governor Little has declared a moratorium on new rulemaking for fiscal 2021, but we have been given indication that if there are temporary rules that need to be considered, again, to help all of you as you are dealing with this situation and the issues it's created now and moving forward, that there's an opportunity to do that. So we're optimistic that that will be the case. And The last thing I want to touch on very quickly is really a housekeeping thing, but as most of you know, there is a requirement in ESSA that you all have financial reports made available that have been reviewed and certified, and I want to let you know that those are going to be included at idahoschools.com, and that we are going to post those on June 1st. And I actually think that web link, I think that's wrong. I think it's idahoschools.org, but we will get that fixed and get that clarified. The important thing, oh, I was just told it's both, so either one will work. The important thing for you all to know is that all of those have been reviewed and certified, both by the department and by you all, and that they will be posted by June 1st. And as I said, we're going to leave questions to the end. Appreciate, again, everybody being here, and I am going to turn it over to Chris Campbell at this point.
Thank you, Marilyn. I'll wait just a minute here for Mark to get this loaded up for us. So what I'm going to do today is go through two of the bills that are going to result in some data element collection changes to some of the things that we currently collect. Mark, if you would jump into the next slide for me, please. So two of the bills that the legislature passed this year, House Bill 523, which created a new advanced professional endorsement and an advanced professional compensation rung, as well as House Bill 624, require some new data elements around the evaluations for your instructional and pupil service staff. So these new laws are actually going to take effect July 1, but as part of the law, they require some calculations based off of data from FY 2020 staff evaluations. So as we go through some of the next set of slides, what we're going to do is talk about some of the changes that we're actually going to have to put in place in order to collect this data in the FY 2020 staff evaluations. So the House Bill 523 adds the advanced professional endorsement. Let's just go through that a little bit so that we can see some of the data elements. This is available to those who've held a professional endorsement for 5 years or more. For instructional staff or pupil service staff, they can apply to have an Idaho advanced professional endorsement. The eligibility for that, they must have held a renewable certificate for at least 8 years or more, or have completed a State Board of Education approved interim certificate of 3 years or longer and held a renewable certificate for 5 years or more. So those are data elements that we have available to us through the teacher certification application system that we currently have. Mark, could you advance to the next slide for me? Thank you. The next item in order to qualify for an advanced professional endorsement is they must show that they met the professional compensation rung performance criteria for 4 of the 5 previous years, or the 3rd, 4th, and 5th year. During 3 of the previous 5 years, they must have served in an additional building or district leadership role in an Idaho public school, including but not limited to these 6 leadership roles that are included on that screen. So as you look at those items, most of you would be aware that those are not items that we currently have available to us in our data collection. Mark, you can go ahead and thank you. Additionally, they must have a written recommendation from the employing school district, and they must have an annual individualized professional learning plan developed in conjunction with their supervisor and a self-evaluation. Additionally, and there are 3 stages here based off of the way that this is phased in. Effective July 1, 2020 through June 30, 2021, so for the upcoming school year, show that they've met the advanced professional compensation rung performance criteria for 3 of the 5 previous years, or the 5th year, which would be the current year. For the following year, 3 of the 5 previous years or the 4th and 5th year. And then for the year after that, it phases fully into 3 of the 5 previous years. So what is the advanced professional compensation performance criteria? As defined, that's an overall rating of proficient or higher That hire, in addition to being added to the advanced professional, for those of you who did not notice, that was also added to the professional endorsement criteria as well, so that if an individual scored higher than proficient, that qualifies as well, just for clarity. No components on their evaluation may be rated as unsatisfactory or basic. That's in addition to what's in the regular professional criteria, endorsement criteria, which is just unsatisfactory. So to move to the advanced professional compensation rungs, they need to have no unsatisfactories or basics. Additionally, they must be rated as distinguished overall in Domain 2 or Domain 3 on the state framework for evaluation, or its equivalent for pupil service staff. They must also demonstrate 75% or more of their students have met measurable targets or student indicator targets. Mark, we're getting a little feedback. Is everybody getting that?
Yeah, so I'm trying to figure out where we're getting it.
Are we good to go again, Mark? I think so, Mark. So I'll go ahead and
I believe we're good to go. Sorry about that. We've cleared it up.
Thank you. You can go ahead and jump to the next slide. Thanks. So the other data element that I want to discuss before we dive into what does this actually mean in the data collection is an addition that's in House Bill 624. House Bill 624 talks about the data that needs to be submitted around evaluations. And this year there is a line in there that says including the percentage of students meeting their measurable student achievement and student success indicator targets. As many of you are aware, traditionally or historically over the last couple of years in the staff evaluation system, we have collected a yes/no question, whether or not the majority of the students for an individual have met their targets. This is clear that we need to actually have the percentage of the students that met the targets. Mark, you can go ahead. Thank you. So what does this mean in relation to the fact that we need some new data elements that we don't already have? So currently, if you have tried to get into the Career Ladder data system to work on uploading or editing evaluations, you would find that it's offline. And currently our developers are making some changes to that application to allow the collection of the additional items. Those changes we expect to have done before the end of May, hopefully sooner if we're able to, but definitely by the end of May. We have some updated data specifications and some documentation that we will be posting directly on the front page of that CLDS application. So that you can download those data specifications for those files, as well as the manuals and the information on what additional items need to be in there. In addition, we understand that this is an additional burden to school districts to collect and input data that you did not collect during the process of doing the evaluations. It's going to be some extra effort to go back and work on that. So as we look at that, we were looking at dates that we could move the June 30th, July 1 deadline. For that, we were able to bump that out to July 17th for the submission of the CLDS, the staff evaluation data. So looking at the CLDS application, for those of you who have not used it or are not familiar with it, it's a web-based application that you access through the standard SDE application portal at that link that's available in that presentation. It's used by you as an LEA to submit and certify your career ladder data, the staff evaluation results, and any professional endorsement recommendations. Additionally, on our side, it's used by SDE staff to calculate the movement of staff and their placement on the career ladder. And it's used by staff in OSBI as they work on review of review of their evaluations. This is just a quick screenshot for those of you who may not be familiar with what the CLDS application icon would look like in your application portal. You would simply click on the CLDS application icon and tile to take you into that application. I believe the next screen is going to show us a draft of the updated version of the screens for entering this new information. So I'm hoping that you can see this. If you cannot see this, we will make sure that we get this posted up so that you have a better view of this. We've made some changes to this screen. At the top of the screen, we've added the evaluation period, so you can very clearly see if you're working on the current evaluation period of 2019-20, or if you're working on a prior year's evaluation. That was an addition to help you as you're working on those, so you know which year you're in and aren't accidentally entering information from a prior year. Going down a couple of lines to where we get the number of components rated unsatisfactory. Next to it, we have the number of components rated basic. So those are just there side by side for those of you who are using the user interface to enter these on screen. The next line below is the question that gets to the percentage of students meeting targets. So for this year, we're removing the question, did the majority of the students meet their targets, that yes/no question. Instead, that is actually a field where you would enter the actual percent of students for that instructor or pupil personnel person that met their targets. That is to the hundredths place, not to the whole percentage. So if you have 75.89%, please enter 72.89%. Enter that out to the hundredths place if you can. The next one down, please indicate which of the listed domains this employee was rated as distinguished. Let me be clear, this is a little draft. We still are working on a little of the language on some of these questions. This is where you would select if this is an instructional staff member. If they were distinguished in domain 2 or domain 3, you would check that box for those that they were distinguished in. For your pupil services staff, you would check the last box if they were distinguished on an equivalent area or measure. The next two sections are related to the leadership roles and or positions that are also a requirement. So the first question is asking you which of these leadership roles or positions that this individual held during this evaluation period. So if they held any of these positions or roles during the current year, you would check the appropriate box that they were a mentor or a data coach or an instructional specialist, etc. And you can certainly select more than one if they held more than one of those roles. Due to the fact that we are collecting this year and we do not have the data from prior years, in order to actually properly calculate or figure out the movement and the placement, we actually need to know if they had this for 3 of the last 5 years. So the following question is asking you, did this employee hold one of these positions or roles for 3 of the last 5 years? If they did, you would select yes. If not, you would select no. Once we have been collecting this new set of data for a long enough period of time to calculate that, we will remove that question and not ask you that because we'll be able to calculate it from the year-by-year data that you're submitting. The rest of it is just a little bit of cleanup. It will again ask you if they had their IPLP in place. And then at the bottom, you would select whichever achievement indicators or success indicators were used to measure the students' targets. This one, I'm going to guess most of you can probably not read. Our hope is to have this cleaned up and finalized and posted for you by tomorrow. Mark, if you would skip to the next screen for me, at least the numbers there we go. We can actually look at these. So what you saw on the prior screen is actually what the template looks like that shows you what data elements go in the file. For those of you who are a larger school district, or you prefer to export the data out of your existing evaluation platform and then work with it in a spreadsheet rather than manually enter it into the system. These are the fields that are being added to the spreadsheet that will need to be reported on for these evaluations. So we are collecting the number of basics on that individual's evaluation. That's a numerical field. The percent of students that met target, again, that is to the hundredths place. The rest of the questions are yes, no. If they were an instructional staff, were they distinguished in domain 2, yes or no? Were they distinguished in domain 3, yes or no? If they were pupil service staff, were they distinguished in something equivalent? That's a yes/no field. Were they in a leadership role or position 3 of the last 5 years? And then the last 6 are those check boxes. Were they an instructional specialist or coach, a mentor, a member of your curriculum or assessment committee, on your leadership team, a data coach, or in some other district designated leadership position? So you would fill those out with yes/no in your spreadsheet. So what I want to be clear about on those is we understand due to the timing, we are reaching out to some of the key vendors that you folks are using for evaluations, but it is likely they will not have enough ability to put that into your systems, to enter it in your system and then export it. It's possible. I certainly won't promise anything on their behalf, but we want to make sure that you have this data available, they have this data available, and we understand you're going to have some work to do to get that data entered, whether it's into your system to export or whether it's in a spreadsheet or another system to merge with that sheet. The last item that I want to talk about is Senate Bill 1329. This particular item relates to career technical education folks, those that hold an occupational specialist certificate, and placement of those folks on the career ladder. What this bill requires is some additional data that details their years of industry experience in a field closely related to the subjects that they seek to teach or are teaching. We do not yet have a final answer on how this item is going to be integrated into data collection. This has not yet been finalized. I know that our team will be meeting with the other folks at CTE. We'll be meeting with Tim Hill's whole team on what set of data is going to need to be available for this. As soon as we have any follow-up information for you, we will get that to you as soon as possible. I just do not have an answer for that one specifically yet today. As Marilyn said, feel free to enter your questions, and we will answer as many of those as we can at the end as we have time. With that, Marilyn, that's what I had to cover today, and I'll turn the time back over to you.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate that. We are tracking your questions, and we'll get to as many as we can when we're finished. I am going to turn things over now to Tim Hill, who's Associate Superintendent for Public School Finance. Tim?
Thank you, Marilyn. By the way, is Greg Wilson still online?
I am here, Tim.
Greg, did you want to make a few comments before I go into the budgeting?
Absolutely. So this is Greg Wilson, the Governor's Education Policy Advisor, and I think the crux of what the public school finance folks are going to be talking about is the outlining the plan and providing the budget paperwork for next year's budget. We sent out a memorandum to LEA statewide last Friday from Governor Little outlining a plan for a 5% fund reduction, which is the equivalent of around $98.7 million. This plan was developed with the Governor's K-12 Council. Tim and I and others were on calls with a subset of business managers statewide, and we visited with a lot of other folks in developing this plan in late April. The governor's #1 priority continues to be K-12 education, and this effort of developing a plan and providing it to you as quickly as possible reflects an effort to really protect K-12 as much as we can and serve students in this extraordinary time. The governor really sent out the memo to give the education community a clear understanding of Idaho's budget situation for next year and to assist them in preparing their local budgets in the coming weeks. And as we've discussed, this is critical as you move into negotiations and working to set your budgets prior to July 1. We're hoping by putting out this plan early, we can allow you to budget effectively, knowing all the information that we know while minimizing the impact on students. As many of you have likely seen, this plan takes into account the state's revenue outlook, which as of right now is projected to be between 8.6% to 14.6% 0.4% less than the previous year. So that's the revenue hit we're right now projecting for the state of Idaho. And this 5% reduction reflects the net of what we anticipate the budget shortfall will be. The general fund budget shortfall will be after leveraging the state's rainy day funds and applicable federal funds. I think ultimately Idaho's in a really good position despite the 5% reduction. I think if you look around, you can see a lot of other states having to unfortunately make bigger cuts to K-12. And I think because of responsible budgeting the past year and efforts to continue to replenish our rainy day funds, we really feel like we're in a strong position to weather this storm. Tim and his team are going to provide more details and answer questions about the plan itself. But the memorandum really outlines 3 critical areas. The first one is personnel, or locking in portions of salary-based apportionment. The second one has to do with line items that we're confident are going to be a little more easy to offset with the existing federal dollars that the state received or potential future federal dollars the state would receive. And then the balance is going to come out of discretionary. Tim will reiterate this, but this plan really is the first step of several to address these fiscal challenges. So this is a plan, and really the first step is providing that plan or that blueprint, because we're not in fiscal year 2021 for another 7 weeks. As stated in the memorandum, some of the next steps we're going to be pursuing is issuing executive orders suspending spending authority up to 5% after July 1. We'll also be looking at reducing appropriations through the Board of Examiners process, which is something we did with the 1% holdback in late April. And finally, as discussed in the memorandum, we're going to be working with legislators to fully realize the reductions that require suspending statutory requirements. And then finally, we are going to be working with legislators on many different issues that we've heard feedback on, whether it's providing more budgetary flexibility, addressing use it or lose it provisions in hiring pupil service and instructional staff. I've heard a lot about the 2% facilities match. And then the other piece that's going to require working closely with the legislature is transportation. So thanks to Tim and his team for putting together these forms really quickly, and I'll continue joining regional meetings in the coming weeks just to answer any kind of outstanding lingering questions. Thanks, Tim.
Great. Thanks very much, Greg, for that. I appreciate that. That's a great segue into our next section, which is going to be covering the fiscal year 21 budget workshops, now budget materials, etc. Now, Mark Hill has up on the screen right now our public school finance webpage. And Mark, if you'll just go down a little ways from there, we're going to go down to the budget forms and documents. Okay, I'm not seeing the screen move yet. There we go. Okay, so under the 2020 and 2021 budget forms and information is all the information that I am going to be covering along with a staff. We have, as participants today, we have Julie Oberly, Brandon Phillips, Pam Brewer, and Carol Peronfar, all standing ready to answer any questions that may come up. And we may be turning this over to Julie to cover special distributions, excuse me. I'm just going to slow down here for a moment. So in any case, the first 3 items under budget presentations are what I'm going to be covering. The first of which, the fiscal year one, go up one more to the very top one and open that one up if you would please, Mark. Okay, this is obviously too small to read, and we're not going to go through this in detail, but it is an all-in look of the original appropriation. Now keep in mind that the original appropriation for 1920 does not reflect the 1% holdback that was roughly just under $19 million. And that's intentional because for statutory purposes, and I'll mention this later, we need to compare the potential 2021 holdback to the original appropriation for purposes of such things that certain statutes measure. So the format of this worksheet shows in the green columns the K-12 public schools appropriation. The blue columns would be the Idaho educational services for the deaf and the blind, and the purple columns would be the total. And so we're going to move off of this and go back to the previous screen. We're going to select the second item, which is fiscal year 21 appropriations excluding IESDB. And so this particular worksheet, and I'm going to open up my copy on my computer because I have some highlights, is isolating that very first worksheet, the green columns. It is excluding the blue and the purple columns for IESDB in the total. Now, my third handout, which we're not going to look at yet, is going to focus on line 1A. How do you go from the $1.887 billion original appropriation for this year to the projected $1.875 billion for 2021? That's on line 1A, and that's showing a reduction of just under $12 million or 0.6%. The section 1B through F contains our state dedicated monies, and they will not be covered on the third worksheet. So I'm going to spend just a few moments talking about those. It's typical that we receive an increase in our endowment lands beneficiary distribution each year, and that thankfully is an increase of $1.3 million. That every little bit helps, certainly. Miscellaneous revenues are going down by the amount that the previous year's legislature appropriated out of the Opportunity Scholarship Fund to supplement the $26 million of literacy monies. And you'll find here in just a moment that we've asked for those replacement dollars in general funds. And so that aside, our miscellaneous revenues are staying flat at $8 million because we do have to remove those one-time monies that were appropriated. In line 1D, the lottery dividend, at the time of the appropriation, the Lottery Commission was expecting the annual dividend to be $61 million. That $61 million by law is split up into three pieces, 2 pieces of 3/8 going to the public schools and the permanent building fund, and the remaining 1/4 going to the bond levy equalization fund. So what we believe that was going to be a $24 million distribution this next year is going to be considerably less, and we'll be covering that in the special distributions. And so instead of getting 3/8 of $60 million, we're getting 3/8 of $50 million, and bond levy will also see a reduction. The good news for the bond levy is that we have license to tap the Public Education Stabilization Fund for any shortfall based on those distributions. And so I won't say anything more about the bond levy fund. Is that the good news is that we'll be able to distribute the amount necessary that you'll be able to pass through as a benefit to your taxpayers for what you'll certify to your counties in September and reduce their tax burden. We're expecting that cigarette and lottery taxes are going to stay flat, and there's not much of a balance in this fund, and that's why we are unable to send all those monies out until late in the year. Mr. Studebaker from our department manages these funds and is expecting that we will hit the amount we need to pay out the balance here in the next 2 weeks, assuming that those taxes, which are on tobacco and winnings on lotteries. And so those are the 2 sources of funds for those monies. So moving down to line 1G, federal revenues, we can see the reduction of $14 million. And please don't be alarmed that what this is a reduction in spending authority. I believe our most recent expenditures was about $225 million. And so the legislature chose to reduce that spending authority, and we believe and hope that that will be sufficient monies for all the drawdowns coming in fiscal year 21. So sections 2 and 3 are our statutory and non-statutory expenditures, and all the dollar changes in that third column will be addressed in my third and final handout. It will also be addressed in our special distribution section as well. Moving down to section 8, our distribution factor, which is a function of the net state funding, Greg Wilson mentioned that a portion of that discretionary monies was being reduced, and what you're seeing here is the reflection of that. And the statute that deals with financial emergencies, 33-522, requires there to be at least a 3% reduction of the distribution factor from the original appropriation in the prior year, and that is why we're showing the original appropriation for 1920 instead of the net 1% holdback amount, so that we can show and illustrate that this 3% threshold has been met. Now, I need to make sure that everybody understands that as Mr. Wilson said, this is a plan. Nothing official has taken place. It cannot happen until the fiscal year gets here. And so the superintendent, who has the ability to make a declaration that the criteria in 33-522 Idaho Code has been met, is unable to do that because this is simply a direction at this point. This is not a final decision of the governor through the Board of Examiners. So I just need to make that disclaimer. So Mark, I'm ready to go to the next handout, which is the fiscal year 2021 appropriation summary. This is a worksheet, as I mentioned before, and its goal is to take us from, can you make that just a little larger? Is that possible? And if not, no problem. Again, this will be available on that web page for you to download and look at. But I'm sorry for all the red ink, but I wanted to point out, thank you, that's way much better. So again, on the previous worksheet on line 1, we're seeing the general fund original appropriation of $1.887 billion. And all the changes below here are going to reflect how we go from the $1.887 billion for the original appropriation for this year to down at the bottom. You don't need to scroll down, Mark, but you'll see that on line 9, when we get there, that is reflecting the plan of the 5% holdback on what the most recent legislature appropriated for $1.875 billion. So starting with Section 2, Section 2 is an area where we do such things as remove one-time monies. I mentioned a moment ago that we had some one-time monies, but those were dedicated, and so they have no effect on this worksheet because the objective of this worksheet is to show the changes in the general fund from one year to the next. And so you're seeing a minus $1.3 million for the endowment land. You're wondering, well, gee, it doesn't make sense because Tim just said that we had a $1.3 million increase. We need to remember that these are dedicated monies, and all else being equal, if nothing else changed, this would provide that amount of relief to the general fund, and that is why it's a negative. Section 3 and 4 deal with our statutory and maintenance items, only segregated by the governor's task force, and this is the original task force from 2013, not the one that just concluded here this last year. But recommendation number 4 was to put in place advanced opportunities. And so we have, the superintendent has asked for and received a $2 million increase in that statutory requirement. The statute doesn't require a total amount, but it does lay out an amount of $4,125 for our students in the 7th through the 12th grade. So in Section 4, we're seeing those items that are not part of the original task force recommendations, although some were in the early years. For example, the career ladder was one of those items, item number 12 in the recommendations, but the recommendation was to establish a career ladder, so that has been established. And so Section 4, again, really measures items that are in terms of a maintenance or a growth component, not any enhancements, which we'll cover down in the line item sections here in just a moment. So the first item, and these are in order of magnitude with the exceptions of the 5% items, we estimated that it was going to cost $11.5 million to pay for additional staff due to growth in our attendance. which then converts into support units. And so you can see that our support unit increase from 15,658 to 15,861 is driving that $11.5 million increase in the statutory formula for salary-based apportionment for instructional and pupil service staff. Item 4B is a huge increase because in our most previous year, it just ended, we had a huge spike in the reimbursements, and that wasn't accounted for or funded in our fiscal year 2020. So we're filling the hole, and at that $7.7 million, hopefully going forward after that, when we move into fiscal year 22, that will be, much closer to a $1 to $2 million increase. Item 4C deals with, again, a support unit growth. In this case, it's the end of the year support units, which is our discretionary component, going again from 15,601 to 15,821 at a cost of just under $6.3 million. Item 4D would be the second year of House Bill 153. And even though we're going to be talking about freezing the movement on the career ladder, the second year of the base allocation increases are still in play, and that's going to cost a little over $6 million. Item 4E would be the growth component associated with our administrators and classified salary-based apportionment for a cost of about $3.3 million. Charter school facilities, we're expecting that to go up by $1.5 million. Leadership awards and premiums showed an increase based on an estimate of additional full-time equivalent staff from just under 18,100 to just under 19,000 for a cost of 900,000. And directly underneath there is the first of many items that are attributable to the 5% holdback. And so the plan is to not distribute any leadership premiums in fiscal year 2021. And so what we saw in 4G was an increase from 18.4 to 19.3 million, and then a removal of that 19.3 million for fiscal year 21. And this will be revisited or maybe mentioned in our special distributions. I think maybe not, because we excluded that item completely from our special distribution worksheet. Item 4H would be the estimate of the general fund portion of the bond levy equalization support program. So I mentioned earlier that 25% of the annual lottery dividend goes to pay for bond levy, but that in and of itself is not sufficient to pay for the whole amount. The balance then of $857,600 increase in general fund is what we need, and you can see in the description that about $8.8 million of that total is required from our general fund. Item 4I, salary benefit apportionment. This is a measurement of our administrators' experience and education index. Years ago, the instructional and pupil service staff moved off of this index and onto the career ladder. This index still remains in place for our administrators. And then we have a small adjustment for something the statute refers to as our small district staff allowance, which provides additional FTE for those small school districts that are less than 40 or 20 in support units. Item 4J, border contracts, we're estimating that increase at $284,000 based on additional increases in expenses and number of students. We have 5 districts that have a relatively small number of students that are going to our bordering states for education, because those local boards believe it's in the best interest of those students not to be on a bus for several hours, and they have educational opportunities much closer to the bordering state than in Idaho. Item K, Idaho Digital Learning Alliance or Academy, statutory distribution increase of $224,000. Item L, exceptional contracts, tuition equivalents, relatively flat. Math and science requirement down slightly. And school facilities maintenance match, which is showing a decrease of $2.1 million, is more likely to be a higher amount because it is in concert with the increase in lottery dividend. So when that lottery dividend goes down, our school facilities maintenance match is going to have to go up. So this is an estimate that was made in place when we thought we were going to have a share of $61 million of the lottery dividend, not $50 million. But it's not available to us to go in and change that appropriation at this point. So you can see that the total of those categories between the two is just under $20 million, just slightly over 1% of the total. Moving to items 5 and 6. This is the section where we go beyond what's required by law, what is going to be growth components, and truly enhancements. And so prior to the 5% holdback, the legislature, as you well know, implemented or adopted a law that enhanced the career ladder with an advanced placement rung, in addition to, I guess that's pretty much, you know, the growth on the movements, and then the advanced placement was going to cost us $32.5 million. A large component of the 5% holdback, and it only makes sense that when you've got a large target of roughly $98 million, the 5% holdback, and you've got to go to salaries and benefits, there's just not enough room in all the line items to get to that total. And when we remember that roughly 85% of our annual operating budget from Monies, state funds, are for personnel, then it only makes sense to go there. So we can see a reduction of $26.6 million, which is going to freeze movement on the career ladder. Item 5B is, as I mentioned earlier, the replacement of those one-time dedicated monies that were appropriated in fiscal year 2020 with general funds at $3,156,500. And those are the items that continue to tie back to the original governor's task force line items, 2013. Down in section 6 would be those that were met, previous ones. For example, at the time of the 2013 governor's task force, we were below the peak distribution factor. I think that was in 2009, I'm thinking. And so one of the goals was to restore those discretionary / operational dollars. That has been met, and we have been going up since that time, up until, of course, 2021. So beginning with item 6A, the legislature recognized the increased cost for health insurance at $7.4 million. So that and an additional $13.5 million was then reduced from discretionary. And again, the stakeholders and the groups decided that that was a reasonable target. And I guess I want to really emphasize that I mentioned earlier that until official action, the direction of the 3% reduction in the distribution factor is just that. There's no way to officially declare a financial emergency, but the stakeholders wanted to at least have the ability, if needed, and I want to emphasize that. This is not an assumption that everyone's going to be in a financial emergency in fiscal year 21. But if there is a need for it, this is one of the criteria that has to be met in order for that to happen. Moving to 6B and C, let's just talk about both of those together. These remove the 2% change in employee compensation, the increased base salary for both classified staff and administrative staff at $3.151 million and $1.978 million respectively. So the legislature appropriated the increase, and the 5% is removing each of those. Professional development went up by $1 million, but then they went down by $9 million on the 5% holdback. Down to section 7 would be those items that are components of the holdback, but didn't have a related line item up above. And the reason they didn't have a line item above is that if there's no change in the appropriation from one year to the next, then there's no change. For example, the legislature kept technology flat at $36.5 million for fiscal year 20 and 21, but $10 million is the plan to reduce that for fiscal year 21 as a part of the 5% holdback. IT staffing from 8 to 4 million, $4 million reduction. Content curriculum from 1.6 million to 0. From gifted and talented, 1 million to 0. And central services to be determined from our total central services of 12.7 million to $11.7 million. So all of the red line items in total add up to the $98.7 million target of what the 5% holdback would be on the general fund for fiscal year 2021. I'm going to say it one more time. This is a plan of the governor based on Mr. Wilson's comments, his memo, and he is unable to take any official action until that fiscal year gets here. So, but he wanted to make sure, it's my understanding that he wanted to make sure that you had an opportunity to plan for that if that's likely to happen, which appears to be the case. So with that, that's how we go from our 1.887 billion, the original appropriation, to 1.875 billion for the planned appropriation for fiscal year 21. And with that, I'm going to move into special distributions and give Julie Oberly an opportunity to cover that if she chooses.
I'm ready, Tim.
Okay, then it's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. The fiscal year 2020-21 budget forms were posted on Tuesday to the public school finance portion of the department's website. You can see that Mark is hovering over the summary of revisions, and I wanted to point that out to you because as hard as we try, there will probably be a few corrections made to our forms. Any changes made will be summarized on this summary of revisions so that you are aware of what form changed and what changed on that form. To help you budget for the almost $200 million in special distributions we'll be sending you in fiscal year 2021, we've prepared two versions of the special distributions document. The only difference is that the second version gives you coding suggestions for when you receive the revenues and you expend the dollars. You can follow along on the screen, or you can go ahead and open the fiscal year 2020-21 special distributions document if you want to be able to control the font size better. So the special distributions are in alphabetical order, beginning with advanced opportunities and ending with technology. Any questions you have on how to budget for these special distributions should be directed to us in school finance. Any questions on how to use the funds, for example, what are the permissible uses, should be directed to the contact person shown for that distribution. So beginning with advanced opportunities, $20 million was appropriated, and there are two different components to this. The first component is the Fast Forward program. This funding is to pay for overload courses, dual credit courses, college-bearing exams, PT exams, and workforce development training. Every public school student in grades 7 through 12 is allocated $4,125 for these purposes. In most cases, these dollars will be paid directly to Idaho Public Post-Secondary Institutions and to the IDLA. The second component is the Early Graduation Scholarship. A student who graduates at least 1 year early is eligible for a scholarship equal to 35% of the ADA funding, which they can then use at an Idaho Public Post-Secondary School. School districts and charter schools will receive an equivalent award of 35%. Please be sure that you report these qualifying students to the State Department of Education by June 15th of each year. Please contact Brock Astle with any questions you may have. Moving on to the Bond Levy Equalization Support Program, $25.4 million was appropriated for this. These dollars are paid to school districts with eligible bonds. To receive funding, please be sure to send us a copy of your bond payment schedule for each eligible bond that you pass. If you already have eligible bonds, but you have refinanced those bonds, please be sure to send us an updated version of that payment schedule. Charter schools are not eligible for these funds. However, they are eligible for the Charter School Facilities Fund. $10.4 million was appropriated for this. Charter schools should budget $420 per next year's 2020-2021 enrolled student for on-site charter schools. The calculation is different for online and online on-site charters. If you are that type of a charter school, an online or an online on-site charter school, please contact me and I can send you a worksheet to help you estimate your payment for 2021. $9 million was again appropriated for the College and Career Advisors and Student Mentors distribution. These dollars will be distributed based on your 2020-2021 enrollment. If you have 100 or more students enrolled in your grades 8 through 12, budget the greater of $67 per student in grades 8 through 12, or $18,000. If you have less than 100 students enrolled in grades 8 through 12, budget the greater of $180 per student, grades 8 through 12, or $9,000. Please contact Eric Studebaker in our Student Engagement and Safety section with any questions. $652,000 was again appropriated for continuous improvement plans and training. Each school district and charter school can budget up to $6,600 for qualifying training. Remember, though, that these funds will be distributed on a reimbursement basis. Please contact me with any questions. $4,820,000 was appropriated for English language acquisition, of which $450,000 will be used for competitive grants. The remaining $4,370,000 will be distributed to all school districts and charter schools with qualifying students. Budget $205 per eligible English learner that was tested on the Spring 2020 Access 2.0 assessment and was identified as L1 and LE as reported in IC. Students with other IC codes do not qualify for this funding. Please contact Maria Puga in our federal programs area with any questions. I work with the distribution for exceptional contracts, the tuition equivalencies, and the SED, Serious Emotional Disturbance Allowance. To estimate your funding for these items, please look or review the other state funding worksheet that's included with the budget forms on the school finance website. And just a reminder that these dollars are paid to you as part of your foundation payments on line 6 and are not a separate distribution. We work with Chris Campbell on the IT staffing allocation for the $4 million remaining in that appropriation. If you have less than or equal to 10 midterm support units, budget the greater of $625 per 2020-2021 midterm support unit, or $4,500. If you have more than 10 midterm support units, budget the greater of $230 per 2020-2021 midterm support unit, or $7,500. Please contact Chris Campbell in our Technology Services Department with any questions on allowable uses of these funds. $26,146,800 was appropriated for literacy proficiency. You should budget $670 per average number of students in kindergarten through grade 3 who scored basic or below basic on the fall statewide reading assessment in the prior 3 years. Please contact Carlin Laraway in our assessment area with any questions. Fiscal year 2021 will be the second year we are distributing Master Educator premiums, whose appropriation is again $7,175,400. You should budget $4,783.60, which is a $4,000 base plus $783.60 in state paid employee benefits per eligible instructional and pupil service staff. We work closely with the State Board of Education on this distribution. The State Board is responsible for reviewing and approving the applications. Once the State Board, provides us with the list of approved applicants, we make this distribution. Please contact Brandon Phillips with any questions. $6.5 million was appropriated for the math and science requirement. And like all the distributions we're talking to you about today, we distribute these dollars based on the requirements in Idaho Code or the intent language. Please be very, very careful when budgeting for these dollars if you are near a funding cap. For example, if you've been hovering in the 90s for your enrollment, you would use the first line that says, for each regular high school with enrollment of 99 or less, budget $33,100. What if your enrollment goes up over 100? Then you would need to only budget the $2,900. So please, again, be very careful when budgeting for this distribution. The National Board for Professional Teaching Standards pays $2,391.80 per eligible instructional staff. In fiscal year 2020, we paid 14 teachers at 9 school districts for this distribution. If you have any questions on if you have eligible staff, or you should contact Sena Lackey in our certification department. $9,850,000 was appropriated after the reduction for professional development. You should budget $8,000 per school district or charter school, plus $440 per 2020-2021 instructional and pupil service staff FTE, all fund sources. Please contact Todd Driver in our content and curriculum area for additional information. $4,700,000 was appropriated again for remediation. Remember I mentioned that summary of revisions document a few minutes ago? Well, due to the cancellation of the spring 2020 ISAT, we are currently working with our assessment area on how these dollars will be distributed. Because for the fiscal year, we would have used that ISAT to make the distribution. So once we have that resolved, we will get the special distributions documents updated, and we will include that update on our summary of revisions. Please contact Carlin Laraway in our assessment area with any questions on how those funds can be used. We have replacement tax worksheets on our website for ag equipment and personal property tax replacements. School districts should use these amounts when completing their L2 form. This is not applicable to charter schools. Please contact Carol Piranfar in School Finance with any questions. $4 million was again appropriated for safe and drug-free schools. Budget $2,000 plus $12 per prior year, 2019-2020, full-term average daily attendance. Please contact Eric Studebaker in our Student Engagement and Safety area for help with allowable uses of these funds. Tim talked about the lottery funds a little bit earlier, and we are having schools budget less in fiscal year 2021 than they did in 2020 because of the reduced dividend. Schools should budget $65 per 2019-2020 best 28 weeks ADA. Please remember that these dollars must be used for qualifying repairs and maintenance to student-occupied buildings. Please contact me with any questions. school facilities maintenance match had an appropriation of about $2 million. We have a worksheet on the State Department's Public School Finance website with the other budget forms to help you estimate what this payment will be. But remember that not everybody is going to receive these funds. Each year in the fall, we calculate the state match requirement per Idaho Code 331019 for school building maintenance. If the lottery dollars that we just talked about were enough to satisfy the state match for your school, district, or charter school, you will not receive these funds. If the lottery distribution was less than the state match that was required, that's when we'll send you that difference in school facilities maintenance dollars. Please contact me with any questions that you might have. The last special distribution is for technology that has a $26.5 million appropriation. To estimate your distribution for fiscal year 2020-21, budget the sum of the appropriate base amount based on your 2020 midterm ADA plus $73 per 2020-2021 midterm ADA. Please contact Chris Campbell in our technology services area with any questions. What I haven't talked about, but Tim mentioned earlier, is that there will be no distributions in fiscal year 2021 for content and curriculum, gifted and talented, and leadership premiums. Those were eliminated per the governor's 5% holdback guidance. This is the end of my prepared remarks. Please do let us know what questions you have. Mark?
Thanks, Julie. This is Marilyn Whitney again. Appreciate that. We are going to take just a few minutes and answer some of your questions. But again, we will post a Q&A, so if your question doesn't get answered, we will get to it. I'll just take the first one before I turn it over to Chris to answer questions, and then to Tim to answer some as well. There was a question about the standards and changing them again at this point. So I want to just let you know that the math and ELA standards were up for review again. Those are on a 5-year cycle. They were last reviewed in 2015 and reauthorized by the legislature in the 2016 session. So we would have been reviewing math and ELA anyway this coming year. So that's actually on schedule. The science standards were adopted in the 2018 session. They would not have been up for review under normal circumstances. But as I said at the beginning of the webinar, the legislature was very clear that they wanted to see some changes. And in the interest of not having to spend a lot of time and effort, as well as taxpayer dollars, on continuing to debate the standards, there was an agreement that we would go forward with reviewing math, science, and ELA. And the direction that we were given was to simplify, streamline, to look at age appropriateness. And so those are all things that we should be doing anyway, and they will be part of that review cycle. But the legislature does have the authority at any point in time to review standards or to review administrative rules, and that's where our content standards are. And we want to get to a point where we can have standards that we can leave in place for a period of time that certainly helps all of our educators out there. But to do that, we have to be partners with the legislature and get to a point where we can agree for the most part on the standards that we have. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Chris to answer some of the questions related to the data.
Thank you, Marilyn. Let me go through here some of the questions that you've sent over to me. The first question that I see is, will the districts have the opportunity to modify the data for the teachers? We have some teachers whose principal marked that they did not meet their achievement goals because they wrote their goals in a way that they did not understand the statutory language. We need to clean up the data and are hoping there will be an avenue to do so. The answer is yes. As districts, you have the opportunity to correct data that needs to be corrected from your district if it needs to be done. At this point, the evaluation system is not open yet, even for submissions, so you have time now to be making those corrections before it opens up. The deadline for submission of that data will be by the 17th of July, so you have time between now and then to be working on making any corrections that you need to. As with any other data collection, if you discover errors in your data reporting after that point, please just work with us and we'll work with you to figure out how to get that corrected after the fact as well. The next question that I see in the list for me is the percentage of students meeting achievement targets for this year or next year. That item, the percent of students meeting achievement targets, is for this year's collections, so for the FY20 evaluations. That replaces the question that asked whether the majority of the students met targets or not. The next item that I see in the list is how much of the IC evaluation data is open to public records requests. So let me answer what I can. So public records are run through our communication department, through our public records officer, who follows all state laws in regard to public records. The majority of information that we receive in relation to evaluation is essentially personnel data, so it is not released on an individual level basis. We do receive requests for reports of aggregates, for example, how many teachers were proficient, how many teachers were basic, and we do generate reports on aggregate data. The next question I see in the list: because we have not submitted information related to the number of basics on an evaluation in the past, how will you gather that information for prior years to determine that the teacher met criteria 4 of the past 5 years? So what I want to call out on that one is the phased-in approach in subsection F in House Bill 523 of that section around the advanced performance and endorsement and the compensation rung, which says that effective July 1, 2020 through June 30, 2021, show they have met the advanced professional compensation performance criteria for 3 of the 5 previous years or the 5th year. So what that does is it allows us to look at the data from this year as their 5th year to see if they met that in the last year. Let's see, sorry, I lost my place in my list here. I'm looking at the next question. Looks like there's a question, can you please provide more clarity on CTE so that we can get it right for them? We will be happily providing as much information as we can on the placement of CTE occupational specialist certificate holders as soon as we possibly can. In order to make sure we're getting it right for them, we're making sure that everybody who needs to meet on that is meeting. That's Tim Hill's team and those from certification and CTE and board staff, just to make sure that we're all on the same page and fully making sure that we're capturing that appropriately and that we don't ask for data that would not provide the right answer. So as soon as we have the information from that, we'll get that out, and whether that results in another webinar on how that's handled or a direct communication, we'll make sure that information gets out to you as soon as possible. Marilyn, that is the last question that I have on that list that you forwarded to me, so I'll turn it back over to you for Tim.
Thanks, Chris. Tim, I did send you some questions as well. If you have those, great. If not, I can read them off. Just let me know.
Okay, sorry about that. I was looking at the email and then had a hard time getting back to my back to my webinar. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thanks, Tim.
All right. Okay. Just I'm going to start with the questions. I'm going to go back to the email. Let's see here. And then I just want my staff to know, I want both Julie, Brandon, Pam, and Carol, I forwarded these questions to you. So if I call on you, be prepared to answer what you can. All right. So first question, is it possible for any teacher to move to advanced professional compensation for this year if the career ladder is frozen? The answer is no. And then if any of the staff disagree with any of my comments, please just jump right in. Next question, is advanced professional compensation loan going to be paid for the 2021 school year with the career ladder freeze? That is a similar question, and the answer is no. Now, Brandon Phillips in our department, who is our frontline person for salary-based apportionment, on the salary-based apportionment worksheets, there is not an option for you to put any FTE into an advanced placement cell. Just because of the answer I just gave, it's not possible for us to fund anybody for the fiscal year 21 year. That's the plan, the guidance from the governor. Next question, governor's plan indicated that content and curriculum line item was reduced from $6,350,000 to $4,750,000, but I didn't see content and curriculum anywhere on the special distribution. Is it just gone? Yes, it's gone for the distribution portion, which was the $1.6 million. There's $4,750,000 in our central services division. Our central services division is monies that's spent on your behalf, and I don't have the detail on what that comprises. But what we wanted you to know for budgeting purposes, what to plan for. So anything in central services, and this gets to a question later on, anything in central services does not impact you at all. So the $1 million that the superintendent is offering up out of central services is providing one less million that has to be reduced from our distributions to you. Next question, the governor's letter indicates there will be no movement on the career ladder. That is correct. Does this mean we should report the teacher's position on the ladder the same as it is this year, or is it just the salary that will be the same as fiscal year 20 while they move on the ladder in terms of professional rung assignment? That's a little confusing to me. I'm going to try to answer that, and I'm going to ask Brandon to step in on that as well. So it's my understanding that with the exception of new people that come on, is that, we know where their rungs are. So Brandon, would you like to attack this one for me?
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully you can all hear me. So yeah, Tim's right. You don't report to us the career ladder positions for individuals that are already in the system each year. So if somebody was a P1 last year, we'll go ahead and just not move them to a P1 this year. And just to clarify something, I know I get a lot of questions on this. The fiscal year is not freezing with them. We're looking at they move to the new line as long as they've met all the performance criteria requirements as general. So they're not staying at 1920 levels just because it's frozen. They're staying at 2021 levels just with the same position.
And by the way, let me add something else. We're going to run all of these questions by the State Board of Education, specifically Ms. Tracy Bent, to make sure that we're not providing any conflicting information. And so we're going to do our best to answer these today, but we're also going to run everything by her as well to make sure that we're all on the same page. Moving on to the next question. The governor's finance memo states we will be freezing movement of instructional pupil service staff on the career ladder. Would you please confirm that if a teacher was a P1 on the career ladder for 1920, that they stay as a P1 for funding purposes for 2021? I'm going to say yes. Brandon, is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. Okay. Next question. Just to clarify, the RP1, RP2, and RP3 are going up to $40,000, $40,500, and $41,000 respectively. That is correct. That this 5% is not affecting anything in statute other than just suspending distributions and spending authority. So that law is in place, and there's nothing at this point that's going to change that law. Clarification, next question, 40,000 minimum funded, change in and I'm going to answer that one first. So yes, the statute continues to say you may pay no less than the minimum rung of $40,000. The controversy will continue from last year, which deals with the definitions in 33-1001 Idaho Code that says that in local salary schedules, I'm going to open that up here, grab my book. Subsection 17, local salary schedule means a compensation table adopted by a school district or public charter school, which table is used for determining monies to be distributed for instructional staff and pupil service staff salaries. Minimum compensation provided under a local salary schedule shall be at least equal to $38,500. This is, again, the definitions, and this is going to be, I'm guessing this will be amended when we get our new book, but it may not be. Or for staff holding professional endorsement, $42,500. Now, what we received last year, a year ago, was a letter from the legislature, from the governor's office, and the attorney general's office to say that this is not in conflict with the section 1004 that talks about having to pay the minimum salary schedule. And so the questions we've already received and will continue to receive is, are you required to pay someone with a professional endorsement, regardless of whether they're in the professional rungs or not? You could have someone with a residential rung and a professional endorsement. Do you have to pay them the minimum amount on the P1, which is the $42,500 going into next year? So there's the situation. The answer is that the school boards came out and opined that they believe that the analysis from Anderson, Julian Hull, specifically Amy White, was that they believe that you needed to pay that minimum. And so I'm going to let you, as you've done for 19 and 20, decide who you want to go with on that decision. The next question says change in education allocation, bachelor's plus 24 and master's. There's nothing that I have read, there's nothing in the governor's holdback guidance that suggests that those will change. And so anybody who has achieved the bachelor's in 24 and the master's per statute, we will be funding those dollars to you as part of your salary-based apportionment. Next question, are the monies left in
Tim, can I jump in real quick?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so just to go back on that for a second, one, there's going to be a lot more people this is going to fall for this year, because all the RP3s who are going to get professional endorsement at the end of this year are going to stay RP3s next year. So I'd be cautious of that. The other thing too, just to clarify a little bit, we were given guidance last year to set up the system so that if somebody was funded less than that minimum, the FTE is ratcheted down. So while you do have discretion as to whether or not to pay them that, there is currently in our system a penalty for it.
Now, Brandon, that's been rather small. Is that correct? Depending on the FTE.
Yeah, it's not a large portion of people, but there are, there's probably one or two in a lot of different places.
All right, so that said, if you're in that situation and you have someone who meets that criteria, please get a hold of Brandon Phillips on that.
Yeah, and
okay,
again, there's going to be a lot more next year.
Okay, I'm sorry to hear that. All right, next line item, or next question. Are the monies left in item 5A because of people receiving a professional endorsement moving to P1 and people receiving an advanced professional endorsement moving to AP1? No, that is not correct. The majority of those monies, I think, are addressing the, let me think about this for a second. So we have a net of 26.6 and 32.5. Now, the 26.6 estimate that we got was from a model that the State Board of Education jointly has been working with Legislative Services on, and the governor's office. I'm not sure that I have enough detail to answer that question. So, because the 5A I'm going to say that the majority of those monies, well, what I understood was that the 26.6 million reflects freezing and not funding the advanced placement. So I'm just going to leave it at that, and then I'll try to get a hold of those folks that I just mentioned and see if there's any more information that I can share with you in the Q&A or the FAQ. Okay, secondarily, according to Idaho Code 331004B sub 4, it appears that people earning the advanced professional endorsement may move from as low as P2 to AP1 if they receive this endorsement. Is this correct? Brandon, you want to take a stab at that one, or do we need to do some more research on that?
That is one of the ones we got some information back on. So the answer is yes. With this one, we were told that they don't have to go through all the interim cells. Now, again, because there's no movement next year, nobody's going to make that jump at that time. But in the future, yes, that would be what happened.
Okay, thank you. All right, last question that I have for Marilyn is, what does central services entail? SDE question mark, or is this a reduction that will be passed on to districts? So I believe I answered that question before. I'm going to repeat it again just for purposes of clarity. And I'm going to tell you what the items are in our central services. Okay, so first of all, answer the last question first. Nothing that's going on in central services affects you in terms of distribution whatsoever. You know, we had, prior to the $1 million offering from the superintendent, we had $12,667,600 as follows: $350,000 to support mastery-based education expenses, $2,258,500 for student achievement assessments, a little over $1.8 million for the math initiative, $741,300 for remediation, $50,000 for English language learner costs, $2.7 million for professional development for reading coaches, etc. $4,750,000 for the content curriculum. That I mentioned that one earlier, and those add up to the $12.667 million. We're going to reduce that. The superintendent is going to decide where to cut the $1 million out of those 6 line items between now and July 1st, so that when the governor decides to is ready to take action with the Board of Examiners and goes into the appropriation bills to make those reductions, he'll know where to cut. So unless there's any additional questions that Marilyn sent, let me open up my email here. I don't see any more from her. I'm going to turn it back to you, Marilyn.
Thanks, Tim. There are a couple more that I'll read off here in just a minute, but one that I can address. There are concerns about the gathering of data and what to use in terms of the students meeting their targets, the student achievement data, and questions around the IRI and the ISAT not having been administered this spring. So I would direct you to 331001, subsection 18, Idaho Code, which specifies a number of student achievement and growth measures that you can use, including teacher-constructed assessments, district assessments, student learning objectives, and of course exams. So there are a number of options to actually meet that data requirement. Understand that there are challenges this spring with assessing students. So again, you know, being flexible, but there are options that you can use that are not the IRI or the ISAT. Tim, there's a couple of additional questions here at the end, and I'm just going to read them off and let you and your staff answer them. Is the base allocation for a first teacher going to move to $40,000 or stay at $38,500?
It will move to $40,000.
Okay. If a teacher is an R3 and eligible to get professional endorsement, will they receive the $42,500 even if they don't move cells?
And that goes back to my earlier comments about whether you want to adopt the advice of the school boards for Anderson, Julian Hull's analysis, or if you want to adopt the governor, AG's office, and the legislature's letter. So this goes back to whatever decision you made a year ago for the current year. I'd expect you would follow suit with that.
Okay, there's a request for Brandon to clarify one more time about freezing on the career ladder.
Okay, so yeah, this is just, the new thing here is just nobody moves cells. So it's not like freezing in the past with not meeting performance criteria where you get stuck in different years. If you were an R1 this year, you are an R1 next year, but that dollar amount went up with you. If you were an R2, you stay in R2, R3, stay in R3. You just don't move forward anywhere on those cells, but you go to that new chart. Now, at the same time, those folks who got froze because of not meeting their performance criteria are still over there, and that's still in effect for them. But it's just as far as this this new thing is just not having everybody else move forward a cell.
Thank you, Brandon. Let me add one thing, if I might. Marilyn, may I add just another comment?
Absolutely.
So, thank you. I would like to remind everybody that what we're talking about here, and this is going to be no new information for any of you veterans who have been doing this for a while, but for any of you folks that are rather new, for example, I just want to remind you that the amount that we send you is based on the statutory formula. You still have a great amount of flexibility available to you in developing your salary schedules, with the caveats of the minimums that we spoke to. And so with that, I guess you, as you enter into negotiations, and I know over the last several years of the career ladder that the legislature was made aware and was a bit, in some cases, surprised that that people weren't getting passed on exactly what the state sent out. You know, we do not have a state salary schedule. And we need to remember that the, 6 years ago when the first 5-year plan came into play, by design, the legislature was focusing on much bigger increases for the entry-level teachers and much smaller increases for the veterans. And so what school districts did, what I heard anecdotally is that, they subsidized some of those higher end salary schedule decisions with anywhere from anywhere in between, the middle, if you will. And so that was all decided locally through negotiated decisions, and that continues to be into play today, unless I've missed something legislatively. And so I just wanted to, I guess, remind all of you that your so-called bucket of money that you get for salary and benefit apportionment continues to have some flexibility in it. Thank you.
There are a few questions about the education allocation. In other words, a individual who earns an advanced degree, a master's degree, and that additional education allocation is still in place.
Yes.
Tim, there's another question for you. Sorry, let me get back to it. Does the 5% holdback impact our general revenue as it relates to ADA? Are there any changes to how our support units are calculated, salary/career ladder impacts aside?
Okay, the answer to that is there have been no changes to average daily attendance converting into support units, so the table divisors has not been touched at this time. Now, again, I can't anticipate what this coming legislature may do, depending on what the revenue picture looks like at that time. But I can just tell you, as of today, the governor's guidance is not affecting any of the support unit calculations. And since we're on that subject, we have had meetings this week to revisit some of the information and guidance that we gave to you several weeks ago, maybe even over a month ago, in terms of counting and measuring your attendance for this year as it relates to funding. Plan on another webinar sometime next week, to be determined, maybe Wednesday or Thursday. We're going to have another meeting Tuesday morning, and we're going to revisit and rediscuss as it affects this year for attendance and funding and impacted attendance, etc. So stay tuned for that. Thank you.
Another question, if we hire staff from out of state, where will they be placed on the career ladder? Where they should be currently, or where they would be frozen if they started this year?
Brandon, will you take that, please?
Absolutely. So here's one of those good news, bad news things. For a long time, people have talked about how complicated the Form 8 and 9 process is and how many moving parts it has to it. That all goes away when we go into next year. The language that's associated with it, it is not moved over into the final version of the career ladder. So the current guidance we have from the state board is anybody who comes into Idaho from out of state who is eligible for a professional endorsement next year would be placed as a P1. Anybody else is placed as an R1. There's no other placements to it.
Thank you.
There's a question about whether or not when movement can resume, if there will be an ability to move 2 cells in 1 year to make up for the year that was frozen, and the answer is no. Currently, yes. Anything to add, Tim?
No, I'm, that's the answer, is that we're giving you the information we have available to us today. We can all speculate as to what may happen down the road, but that is purely the case. It's pure speculation. We can only tell you what the guidance is from the governor going into the beginning of the fiscal year, and again, with his objective of trying to let you know sooner than later what to plan for.
And one more for Brandon. Can Brandon please discuss the R3? Rules allow this person to get a professional endorsement. Do they get the education money? This is still confusing.
Sure, okay. So there's kind of 2 different parts to the career ladder process. There's movement along the ladder itself, and then there's the professional endorsement, which is kind of outside of that. The professional endorsement triggers a lot of things just by its existing. It doesn't come into being by being on a particular spot on the ladder, nor does it jump you anywhere on there right now. So if you have achieved that, maybe you were grandfathered in and you just haven't been back to working in Idaho for a while, and you're coming in as an RP2 or an R2, those folks would be eligible for all the education allocations, as well as the minimum of the $42,500, because that's pegged on holding a professional endorsement, not being on the professional rung. So I think that probably addresses most of the question, but yeah, basically they do, anybody who has professional endorsement does get the education allocation where applicable, but they also have to meet that $42,500 minimum, even though they're not funded at that. They're funded at their career ladder placement.
And one more, this one is administrators. Will administrators be offered additional years of experience on their matrix, as the language only mentions the freezing of the base salary?
So yes, there will be the base salary and the placement on the Experience and Education Index. Both are contributors to the calculations, but there's nothing that is going to so-called freeze any movement for an administrator. So additional experience and education will be counted and used to calculate salary-based apportionment. But the effect of the flattening of the base salary would then result in less distributions than otherwise would have been had this not Marilyn, may I add a comment? So Senate Bill, thank you. Senate Bill 1427 was passed late in the legislative session, and it's a cash transfer bill. It moved $3,660,000 from the Driver's Training Fund to our Public Education Stabilization Fund. It moved a little over $6.25 million from the Public School Income Fund to the Public Education Stabilization Fund, for a net of just over $9.9 million, with a current balance of about $62 million. In addition, it authorized the transfer as soon after the beginning of the next fiscal year, soon after July 1 is practicable, another $21.1 million, all three of which adding up to $31 million. Now, that's a good news situation, but we have to also anticipate that that we don't know if that transfer of that 21 million will occur or not. I mean, right now it's law and it needs to be transferred in. So I expect that to happen. Now, we can also expect that we're going to have enough unfavorable variances at the end of our current fiscal year because of salary-based apportionment, advanced opportunities, transportation, again, that we're probably going to be looking at somewhere between $15 to $20 million coming out of PSIF. And so we're still going to have potentially, you know, in the neighborhood of $70 million available for future reductions. And the governor may, I'm not going to speak for what he's going to do, but I can only speculate that he's wanting to save those dollars for any future cut considerations. And so as we saw about a decade ago, that when we had our 4% holdback, that 4% did come out of the Public Education Stabilization Fund. So I'm not going to say what's going to happen. I'm just saying that there will be dollars available to consider for future cuts. If that is not sufficient for the cuts necessary, it could be a combination thereof, or it could be that that fund won't be touched at all. So there's lots of possibilities, but I just wanted to remind everybody that we do have a relatively healthy balance in that fund. Now, I also remind you that the statute allows for any reduction in general funds. We did have a year that PSIF, the Public Education Stabilization Fund, was tapped to fill the hole at the state level, not at the education level. And so there is a provision in that law that allows for that. There's another possibility that those funds could be accessed beyond public education. So that's probably more than you wanted to know, but I just wanted to be transparent and make sure that everybody was clear on the possibilities.
Thanks, Tim. Mark Hill has the SDE's website up and can show you how to get to the post-legislative tour webpage. Again, if you did not see your question answered, my apologies as we're moving through these as quickly as we can, but we will address that on the Q&A that is posted on that website. We appreciate your time this afternoon and are always available to answer any follow-up questions that you have. Thank you so much to Tim and the public school finance team, and to Chris Campbell and our driver, Mark Hill here. And have a great rest of your week, and I'm sure we'll be talking with you again soon.